Hi, and welcome to Doing the Opposite, Business Disruptors, the podcast where you get to meet people who aren't afraid to stand up and call out bad behaviour. People who own their mistakes. They thrive above challenges and who ultimately choose only to see the summit and not the mountain. I'm Jeff Dewing. I'm an entrepreneur, the author of best-selling book Doing the Opposite, and a keynote and masterclass speaker. Now today, you're going to meet Richard Medcalf. Richard is the founder of Xquadrant and a trusted advisor to exceptional CEOs and entrepreneurs and their leadership teams. Now, Richard describes himself as the product of what you get if you were to put a McKinsey consultant, a slightly unorthodox pastor, and Freddie Mercury into a blender. Now, Richard has advised the C-suite for 25 years. After achieving a master's degree at Oxford University, where he came top in his year, he joined a premier strategy consultancy and became the youngest ever partner. He spent 11 years at the tech giant Cisco, selected for an elite team set up by the CEO to pioneer business model innovations with Fortune 100 partners. Richard is binational, English and French. He lives near Paris and is happily married and the proud father of two. He's a licensed lay minister in the Anglican Church and has an insatiable love for spicy food and the electric guitar. So, hi Richard, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today from Paris, or just outside Paris in France. And I'm in Portugal, so we're truly international today. And it's great for you to join me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Jeff, you're welcome. Yeah, it's great to be here for our pan-European conversation. Look forward to it.
So, Richard, if we can spend perhaps 2 minutes, if you can set the scene, your background, the headlines, and the sort of trailblazing journey, and compress it into sort of 2 minutes, that will be really, really helpful.
Sure. Well, I'll try. It's very hard because obviously talking about myself is my favorite subject. But yeah, let's go. So yeah, in a nutshell, so I grew up in the UK. I did well academically, studied at Oxford University, got basically the top mark in engineering there, did a master's there. Went into strategy consulting, did well in that, became a partner, youngest ever partner in strategy consulting. Was headhunted, I moved to Paris at that time. It was meant to be for a year, and I've ended up staying here 25 years later. I'm still here. But I moved to Paris for that year. Became partner in that company, realized I was a big fish in a small pond, thought it would be good to do something different. Cisco Systems, big internet, technology company came along, headhunted me. I thought that sounded a fun thing, become a very small fish in a very big pond. So I moved over to that, was in a team there set up by Cisco's CEO to really kind of catalyze strategic partnerships. As I like to put it, it was like fulfill rash commitments that he would make to other CEOs of Fortune 100 companies, where we had to kind of go in and basically turn an exciting idea between two CEOs into a large, significant business opportunity that required both companies to work in different ways. And then from that, I decided, you know what? I sat back and said, you know what? What's my legacy? What do I really want to create in the world? And I realized it wasn't just to help AT&T or whoever else it was increase their EBITDA margin by 0.1% or whatever it would have been. Nothing wrong with that. I love helping my clients create financial results, but that wasn't my kind of true goal in life. And so I then decided to set up my own business. So I run a company now called Xquadrant. We're basically a small high-end leadership consulting business. So I work with CEOs and founders, other high achievers. I've got people who run multi-billion-dollar companies. Some of them run tech unicorns. Some of them are ex-Olympic medalists who've now turned their hand to business. Very kind of really exciting bunch of interesting people. And what really excites me and motivates me is actually to help them change the world, is how I describe it. My belief is that if the top business leaders in the world don't become forces for good at scale, then who will? And very often, when we're very successful or we've got to a certain level, it's a comfort zone. It's really nice, and people are impressed at us. Um, but secretly, we know, well, we were just perhaps we're lucky, or don't know, it just seemed to happen. It doesn't feel that special to us, and we know we could probably do 10 times more, 100 times more if we kind of perhaps have the courage to reinvent ourselves. So if you like, that's kind of the story in a nutshell. I've also written a book. It's called Making Time for Strategy, just because I found that the first thing my clients encountered on that journey was, Richard, if I'm going to like up level, I've got to get out the weeds. So I wrote that book. Done a few other things. I got on my own podcast as well. But perhaps let me take you back. And I know we're probably at the 2-minute limit here, but that's like the headline, the kind of the CVs, what you can kind of Google. But the deeper story, what really touched me is this is on the video, at least, this is Georgina, picture here. She's my sister. And my dad used to say, I have two children at the opposite ends of the spectrum, because I had my high flying career. My sister was mentally handicapped, disabled, couldn't speak, had a whole bunch of issues. I won't bore you with all of the issues, but she ended up being physically disabled as well. She couldn't walk. She had a whole load of other things going on. She needed 24-hour care. And so for me, that kind of at the time, it didn't feel unusual, just my life. But looking back, I realized it's created this kind of sense of responsibility in me that we had these very diverging paths and we shared the same gene pool. So I don't particularly believe the whole self-made man thing in a sense, because we have all these opportunities and things that come our way. We obviously have to take them. But that's what really drives me, this sense of, well, some people don't get to make an impact. They have the chance, or some people are too busy caring for those kind of people like my sister, and they can't do all the things that perhaps they'd like to do. And so if we have the opportunities, the resources, the skills, the ambition, the energy, like, let's go and make a difference. You only live life once. So that's kind of, I guess, what really drives me at my core.
Well, thank you for that, because that really sets a great scene. And of course, I did read about your sister, which was a sad story from someone from the outside, obviously. But I guess it brings up my next question that says, whilst you're in that environment and knowing the challenges that you personally were facing, with your sister, and your parents would have clearly been facing with your sister, you would think from an outside point of view that would hinder your ability for success, because you had this thing over here that was a big draw on your emotion and your thought process and your care. Yet you still managed to clearly go through that emotional care function because of the things that I've read that you were doing with your sister in that journey, versus what you were doing somewhere else. I mean, what was the conflict that you must have experienced in that journey?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, putting it like that. I guess, I remember my mother at a very early age saying to me multiple times, are we giving you enough attention? This kind of stuff. And I was like, well, duh. Yeah, like, obviously go and sort my sister out. She needs one that needs it. And there was definitely, things in my life. So I'm trying to think where to go here. There were incidents that happened that, made things challenging on one level at home, but on the other hand, it was normal. She was my sister. I loved her. She was actually a very inspiring person. So, because she was so determined, she radiated joy. She could connect with people without all the bullshit that gets in the way often of human relationships. Yeah. So she knew how to make friends, and she was inspiring. Yeah. And she'd also give you a whack if she wasn't happy with you. So there was no filter.
Yeah, brilliant.
So I suppose at the time, it really didn't feel that much of a distraction. It was just, life. I did things like I babysat my sister when I was a young age, and, had to do things like take her to the toilet and put her to bed and things that most teenagers wouldn't do. So I suppose I don't see myself as a kind of a martyr in any way, and then I went and had my life and university and career and everything else. And my sister ended up getting a good care. My parents built a care team, and it worked well. So they got access to her every day, but also they didn't have to do all of the hard work. But I think looking back, and again, I didn't realize till just a few years ago, I thought, well, yeah, it's part of my past, just what it was. But then even working with my own coach, I practice what I preach. I coach other leaders, and I have my own. And he pointed out that probably my sense of care and compassion and empathy probably, comes from, in many ways, comes from those experiences. And also things like some things which are strengths and also, weaknesses on the other hand, like wanting to be the strong one, right? Wanting to kind of just get things done, not be needy, so forth.
Yeah.
That's a strength. Of course, I had to work at that. There's always a dark side on those things, right? It's good to be able to receive as well, right? To be able to admit where we actually need support. That's important. So I suppose those are some of the things to keep in mind.
You've mentioned that your parents, your mother said to you, "Are we giving you attention? Are we giving you attention?" Now, I've met in my lifetime people that have questioned the attention that parents give a specific child for whatever reason. And when you reflect on it, the reason that the parents were giving that child the attention was because they knowingly responded to those most in need, right? So if you've got one child that's married, got kids and got a great job and they're looking after each other, that's great. And then you've got another child over here, it's a single parent and blah, blah, blah. That naturally parenting and even people will move towards, gravitate towards those most in need, right? And the people that suffer the most are the ones that are not in need, that think they should be getting the same attention. So the fact that you said, no, you said, was your exact words, of course you've got to put your attention over there. And that's great. And that also, I believe, came from the fact that you'd experienced yourself firsthand, the fact that your sister was going through these challenges and having the life she was having, and you were trying to work out what must that be like, which then did give you your empathy. The second part of that statement I want to make is that we are all the output of our experiences through our childhood and our upbringing, right? So because of the fact you was in this environment with your sister with these challenges and you were feeling probably very grateful for your environment, that it does absolutely drive that empathy. Whereas if you are in an entitled world, then that tends to hinder people from empathy and care because they've been brought up in this entitled environment. So a lot of the things that really fascinate me is that you become the experiences you've lived, and that's a very difficult thing to break if you found that you were in the wrong place.
It's a great point. The way I see life in many ways is we open up a series of chapters often early on, and the question is, how do we write the remainder of the book? And so one thing I'm always focused on a lot with my clients, these are people who are very successful. I always really stretch their thinking about what is possible for them. And also like what needs to change on the inside, right? What's the stretch? Because it's easy to work in a comfort zone of I'm highly productive and efficient and I can build a plan for anything. But normally it's all about the drive, what's our real purpose here? What are we really trying to achieve? What's really driving it? So are we trying to prove ourselves to our late father or whatever it is? Yeah. And I suppose perhaps part of my own mission is actually to work with these people who actually in many ways don't need to be taken care of, right? Yeah, in many ways they don't. They're taking care of everybody else. So I think part of my role is to take care of them a little bit, and also because to kind of challenge them to go beyond where they've got to in the name of impact and legacy.
Well, if you bring it back to a simple analogy, listen, I buy completely into what you're saying because that's how I live my every day. But if you could go back to a real basic analogy of playing golf, right? So you start to play golf and you can't hit the ball for love nor money. Eventually you start to learn, you play a bit more and you reduce your handicap from 28 to 22. Are you going to go out every day going, I hope I stay at 22 for the rest of my life? Or do you go out saying, well, no, I want to get it down to 20 and then to 18 and then to 16 and then to 12 and so on and so on. That's why we do this stuff. It's mastery, right? We all get out of bed every day because we want to get better at something. That's why we do it.
Well, let me challenge you on that. So actually what I see is that there's three things I call them the three games, right? So one is I'm playing not to lose, right? So actually there is a way of playing which is I've made my money or I've got to this level, I'm even a little more junior level, but I just don't want to screw it up. I've got to keep it going operationally, keep everything together. And that's one game people play. The other game is playing to win. And that's I'm driving and I want to get up my score, all the things you say. The danger being that identity can be associated so much with that it's actually a constant journey of feeling elated because we're winning and feeling crushed because we're behind or we feel we're losing. And that can be a treadmill for people. I did it last year, I've got to do even more this year. And I know that I'm a recovering high performer, as I like to say. I know what that's like. What would it mean if I didn't exponentially grow my business or my whatever it is, each year? And then I think the final level is what I call play to play, which is actually like, yeah, I want to increase my golf or decrease my golf handicap, whatever, not because I have to, but because I want to, because the process of doing that is fun and rewarding and exciting. And so I find a lot of, especially CEOs and entrepreneurs, they're often secretly grinding it out. They're often secretly miserable and frustrated, and not, they can inspire their team, but there's all this stuff going on. And so for me, it's like helping them learn to play again is really important.
I think that statement is very underplayed in the leadership world, right? Because again, we're back to you become the subject of your environment where, command and control for the last 80 odd years has been, well, no, I need to know the answers. I need to tell you what to do. I need to tell you how to do it. And by the way, funny's for when you're at home, not at work, and all this sort of stuff. Yet we're all learning, especially through the COVID era, that actually we've been getting this materially wrong, right? Because happy people, it's like they say, happy wife, happy life, right? It's still the same thing in work. If you've got happy people, happy colleagues, happy teammates, those people by default will be better at what they do because they're happier. So we need to realize the importance of joy and happiness. And coming back to what you just said about the 3 games, which I love the principle of the 3 games, you then look at, when you talk about, this high performer that's then got to perform at the same level or greater next year, they're reacting to the outside world's view of them, right? That's essentially what it's about. And for me, that's a massive insecurity for the people in that environment. And and I use the term, and I'm sure you've used this because you're in leadership, but I love the principle which I stumbled across 5 years ago, which is ikigai. And that's something obviously when I looked at it and studied it, understood it, realised that that's what I'd done for the last 20 years of my life, but I didn't know how to articulate it, and ikigai helped me do it. And that is, why do you exist? What are you going to do? Now, you mentioned someone that is caring for somebody. Well, if that brings them immense joy and immense fulfillment, and they're helping somebody else in the world, then that is as good as it gets, right? If you're a leader that can help, if you can help, I don't know, solve the climate change problem, then great, you're helping hundreds of thousands of people. If you can solve the problem with clean water for 4 billion people that still don't have clean water, then of course that's a massive purpose and a massive mission that's going to get you out of bed every day. But if you only got clean water to 1 million people this year and you got it to 2 million last year, that's not something you're going to feel sad about because you've increased the scenario. And it's about your mindset, right? That's what it's about.
Yeah, that's right. And I've found that as I've worked with CEOs at different levels, from whether they're onboarding, whether they're kind of like establishing their role. And then as they kind of start to, and I see there's a shift in them often. So when they're starting, it's like, I got to get this business and kind of like run it and make sure it's okay. But like one of my clients, he onboarded, he was running $1 billion company. I helped him with all that and really kind of establishing himself in his kind of CEO essence, like really taking ownership and leading the transformation, having the critical conversations, mastering his time and all this stuff. And then we fairly quickly, I was saying, this is great, things are going really well. But what's your kind of ultimate legacy in this business that you want to create? So we started to work on that, and he had his vision. It's like, you need to be talking about that now, because people kind of get that you're competent, but like, what do you stand for? Started to work on that. And then he came back to me just a few months later and said, you know what, you really got me thinking. And I've realized, perhaps I am running a $2 billion company. Like, perhaps I should do something about that. Perhaps I could use this. Perhaps this is my time. Yeah. And he came up with this. He said, I've had this big revelation around climate change. He said, I've really read about it. I've realized it's so important. That's the thing I really want to focus on. It's not just corporate bullshit. I've taken my family net zero. I've become a vegetarian. He was really walking the talk. And he said, I'm going to take my company net zero in so many years, and I'm going to work with partners. And suddenly he had this kind of he was on fire. And of course, what happened as he was on fire about this topic, all sorts of other business things happened as a result, to fund that, to even accelerate his financial goals. He became, I think, he's one of his key suppliers, the major global company, became their number one partner in two areas, got shared the stage with the CEO, which was a company that 10 or 100 times bigger than his, made a huge impact. And so it's really interesting because he realized this was a game he got to play and have fun at. And when you what do I say? I say, you can't move others until you moved yourself. And so, what really moves you? And are you actually inspiring yourself when you get out of bed in the morning? Because if you're not going to inspire your team.
One of the things that I loved about my journey is that my team said to me 2 years ago, as we was coming out of COVID and we had all the challenges of how we're going to survive this and so on and so on. And they said to me in a casual conversation, Jeff, we want to give you a new position. So I said, what's that? And they said, CIO. I said, but we've got a CIO, chief in technology, or CTO, Chief Technology Officer. I said, we've already got CTO. They said, no, CIO, Chief Inspiration Officer, right? They said, because what you're doing every time you engage with us is we get off the call energized, right? And that's because you emit an energy, right? So that's your skill set. That's what you need to focus on. And I took that to heart, and I took it truly. And when someone comes up with an idea about something, we're not allowed to say yes, but we can only say yes and they'll come and say, yeah, and we could do this, and we could do this, and we could do this. So one of the things that is really interesting for those CEOs that are out there leading, medium-sized, large, and hyper large organizations is, what is actually your role? What is your purpose in life beyond your own physical purpose? Because you can't motivate people. People are responsible for their own motivation, but what you can do is inspire them. And the level of which you raise that inspiration is the level that gives them the comfort to move out of their comfort zone because they're inspired, because they can see the opportunity. So it's an interesting journey. If I then counter that, I did a podcast with a fantastic guy last year called Vikesh Shah, who's was an advisor to the government and various other bits and pieces. Lovely, lovely guy. And he was on a panel, a BBC panel, and there was Deloitte was there and various other big players. And someone said to him, because he's a serial entrepreneur, someone said to him, so how would you describe entrepreneurialism? And there was this pause, and he said, do you know what? I've had enough of this. I'm just going to say it. He went, a decade of depression. He said, and then he said you could hear a pin drop in the room, right? Because entrepreneurialism is supposed to be an exciting thing, right? And you've just told me it's a decade of depression. He said, but now the cat's out the bag. Now we can actually talk about the subject. We can talk about the elephant in the room. We can talk about how we start to behave differently, so it's no longer a decade of depression. And it was interesting that someone was prepared to do that rather than paint this rosy picture that says, oh yes, we do this, we do this. And I think that's where leaders really come to life, is when they address the elephant in the room.
Well, that's why I have, if you like, one of the reasons I have my picture of Freddie Mercury behind me here. So yeah, I believe that having fun actually, is a superpower. In the corporate world, I was always, I can be serious and I can be, have gravitas and intellectualize and strategize and everything. And I was always like, yeah, but then I crack these stupid jokes, having, and is that really the done thing? And then I realized in my own business, I'm just going to be me, and people will either like it or they won't. And of course, some people like it, some people don't. But so to your point, what I say in terms of, you talked about inspiration, chief inspiration officer, the way I help leaders is I talk about being more strategic and more magnetic. And you can always, if you want to 10x, 100x the impact you make in the world, then there's always going to be a limit on one of these areas. Either you're not thinking strategically enough, your vision isn't big enough, your focus isn't clear on what's really going to move the needle, right? You're limited in your own thinking. You're seeing the world a certain way. You need it to be challenged. You need to see it a different way. Really focus on the critical few things. And so being strategic is one area. And obviously, as my background in a strategy consulting company, everything else, I'm kind of good at that. But then I also realized the other thing that I've been done through my life, when I'm at my best, obviously I can have bad days like everyone else, but is to be what I call magnetic. And actually, I define it with reference to my sister, because the three things that made her inspirational was she was determined, she was affectionate, and she was joyful. And I realized that's not a bad set of characteristics for anyone in leadership. If you come up with determined, you're on purpose, you're on mission, you know what you stand for, you know what you want. You're affectionate, you take care of people, you show who you are, you don't filter, you filter, within reason,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
you actually should give people who the real you
Yeah.
is, and you bring joy to proceedings, then people are going to kind of respond to that.
And I love that because again, there'll be various people out there, leaders, CEOs that perhaps will raise their eyebrows at this. But one of the things for me that is the most important thing out of the things you just said is number one is to be joyful, create joy, make people feel safe. And they'll always feel safe if it's joyous, right? They won't feel safe if someone's going to, have the right act read to them and stuff like this, or they feel that they're going to be held to task in front of an audience and all this sort of nonsense that goes on. It's that ability to be joyful. And when people say, "Yeah, but there's times you've got to be serious," well, yeah, of course there are, but you have back to authenticity, right? You can't say let's be
Yeah.
joyous and then you be the most miserable bastard in the room, right? So you've got to live. We're back to the famous quotes I love to say. No one cares what you say; they care what you do, right? You can tell everybody exactly how to behave and exactly how to act, but if you don't behave that way, then no one takes any notice.
And it's a muscle to build, right? So I think actually enjoying the journey is a muscle to build. It doesn't always come overnight. So you can say it, but then you got to learn how to do it. And I think the other thing to say around this is, think about being magnetic is magnets also repel as well as attract, and that's also important. And so I think the other thing I see, so strategic and magnetic and inspiring and all these things, there's also this part I often see in clients is that actually there is, just to counterbalance, there is this need as well to calibrate tension that not every leader does. So I see one of my favorite questions for leaders is, what are you tolerating? And they go, and then these things come out. My team, they just blow past their deadlines and they don't really do anything about it, or whatever it is. And sometimes in our quest to become the ultimate kind of empathetic leader or compassionate leader, we don't actually hold the line and keep the standard.
And that's a great word I love a lot. I use a lot is tension. And I say to people, how do you describe tension? What other word would you use to describe tension? And people come out and go, scary, worrying, fearful, and all these various things because they've got this connotation of tension. But tension in the right context is healthy. So my rephrase of the word tension is energy, right? Because when you energize with positive tension, not with tension that's going to make people feel unsafe, but tension that is appropriate and is clear. I guess the other thing that I also learned over the last number of years is that despite being a CEO or having all this so-called responsibility that we sometimes feel sorry for ourselves about, it's that ability to sort of turn around and say, do you know what? I know you're just I don't want to be inappropriate, but I know you're just the typing pool person that's just typing letters. But what do you think about, this situation? What do you think? What would you do differently? And make sure they're in an environment where they feel safe enough to tell you, because sometimes what people misunderstand is, as you said earlier, we see the world through our own eyes. When you're curious enough to want to understand the world through somebody else's eyes, that's when the learning moments appear. And suddenly you can get this incredible insight from the very people you would never have dreamed would have given you that insight. And that's when you come into the proper objective of collaboration. So many people have got so many good things to say, but everyone gets pigeonholed, and that's to everyone's detriment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what can I say? I think in just involving people, right, and actually drawing people out. So I was actually talking with somebody the other day, actually a bunch of CEOs yesterday. I was talking with them, and we talked about the tribal leader effect. So if you think about actually if you think of a tribe, whatever you imagine in a tribe, but often the tribal leader would be the elder and would speak last. Everybody would do their thing, and then the tribal leader would pronounce. And yet, look at most businesses, and the boss is the one speaking first. Here's my meeting, this is the topic, this is my answer. You might pause for a second, anyone got any ideas? And no one really jumps in, so he just continues, tells all his ideas, or her ideas, normally a man probably, but and then anyone got anything else to add? And basically there's silence, or one or two people might, the kind of the bullish ones, one or two might weigh in and have a bit of a ding dong, but that'll be it. Everybody else will just sit there and let it pass. And so we don't get the power of the team operating, the power of the people, because that person's very charismatic and domineering, and they're probably loud in their style and can take up a lot of space. And so what if we went back a bit more to that tribal leader mentality, ask for the wisdom of the tribe, and then perhaps has to make a call,
Of course,
right?
Or help that tribe improve the things that they've come up with, right? Rather than, so we're back to yes and rather than yes but. Someone said to me, how do I know if I'm on a journey to become a good leader? And I'll just use a couple of examples. A good leader will only ever be the last to speak because they're curious about everybody's view before they submit theirs. That's one sign. The second sign is, how many decisions have you made this week? And they'll say 5, 6. How many decisions you made this month? Don't know, 10, 20, 30. Okay, you're on a journey to becoming a great leader when you make no decisions because your team make all the decisions. Your job is just to ask great questions, right? That's all it's about. So when you get the chance to not have to make a decision, then you're on the journey to becoming a great leader. And I think these are the things which is completely alien to the way in which we was all brought up in the journey through education, school, parenting, and corporate world back in 70s, 80s, 90s. And that's where I think COVID shone a light to the extent there was the benefit of everybody, apart from all the bad stuff of COVID, where you can sit back and go, this has been it got everybody to rethink everything. And I think that's been a powerful change.
Yeah, and I think you're right. So that's a great example, right? That kind of zero decision mindset. Reminds me of the CEO who said that, he judged his personal success by the number of kind of decisions hitting his desk that he could just kind of ratify, rubber stamp, say, great. Can he realize that if that wasn't the case, there was a business process failure somewhere along the line that he was requiring him to get involved at the last moment, right? Yeah, if they needed his input, they could ask him, 2 weeks before, right, as part of the process.
Of course.
So, but I think the point here is it's this distinction for me, if anyone's thinking about this transition between insight and action. So, for example, this is a big thing for me. I love helping leaders create an insight. One insight can change everything for people. But also sometimes it is a question of building these muscles, because often what made us successful in the past is perhaps making all the decisions. And now we're being asked to let go of our credibility, the thing that made us successful. And so, for example, one of my programs, it's called Impact Accelerator. I ran it because basically I realized that my clients wanted something to put some of their team through often to help up their levels. And we find that once they kind of figure out what I call observable leadership behaviors, so these are basically things which your other stakeholders are going to notice about you. So if we're making decisions, is a great one. Like, oh yeah, they're always just taking over and making everyone's decisions for them, and not letting other people do it. So if you say, oh, well, that's a great behavior, and now we want to shift that, right? It doesn't happen overnight. So what happens is, I think, two things. First of all, you need to monitor your own awareness. Am I even paying attention to those moments when I have a choice to make a decision or not make a decision? Well, actually, in that program, we get people to actually log each day their self-awareness of did I do my best to do that, or did I forget about it? And then the second part is then to actually ask the stakeholders, right? Are you actually seeing this person make fewer decisions and actually pass it to their team and actually coach the team instead of doing it themselves? And again, when you get that data, what you've created is a game that you can win. And most leaders, most people, when they're trying to become better leaders, they don't have a game they can win because they're not getting actually objective data. It's not what winning is, hasn't really been defined. And so they've just been told to listen more, empower more, be more empathetic, whatever it is. And my wife tells me all the time I could listen more, right? I mean, we can all listen more, right? It's like a never-ending thing. But if you don't create a game we can win, then it's quite hard to build those new leadership muscles.
One of the things that I find extremely powerful is when you say to a CEO or any senior leader, when was the last time you went to your team and said to them, how am I doing? How am I doing as a leader? What am I not getting right? What could I do better? Because that then moves into feedback. That then moves into challenging and critique. That then moves into the very areas 90% of the population are scared of. Because how do I deal with the answer to that question? Because if they turn and say, actually, yeah, you're not very good. You make me feel shit. You've always slagging me down. You're always that. You think, shit. And then you get to an answer and say, no, I'm not. And then you realise that maybe you're not the leader you hoped you were. Because it's that ability to truly ask and seek feedback. There was one quote I heard from an Olympian, which was brilliant, where he said, I will travel 500 miles to get negative feedback, because positive feedback doesn't help me improve. I need those little pieces that are going to help me improve. So don't blow smoke up me. I want to know what I could do better. And I don't take it as critique. I take it as learning moments.
Yeah. And so I think the tool for that is actually, I call it the feedback triangle. So if you imagine like a triangle, and it's actually like it's on a scale. So basically, as the almost like a funnel, as it gets wider towards the end of the triangle, you're getting more general. As it gets narrower, you're getting more specific. And like if you imagine a line halfway through this triangle, so the top half of it, which is positive feedback, and the bottom half and below the line is negative feedback, right? So when you're being general, you can give really positive feedback like you're awesome, and you can give really bad feedback like it's rubbish, right? But it's very general because you got all that wiggle room. But as you start to make it more specific, the judgment falls out of it. So if you get a bit more specific, and it's something like, yeah, I love the way that you, started that presentation. Or, you lost everybody at the end of that presentation. It's kind of getting more specific, but there's still a judgment. But when you actually get to the ultimate specificity, it's just a fact, and it makes people less defensive. Or it even then becomes a question like, did you notice that the engagement level seemed to drop in the second half of your presentation? Yeah. It's just a fact. The judgment has now gone.
But that also comes down to the principle of I guess, difficult conversations, where a difficult conversation is very easy, one, when you practice it, but two, when you're very specific. And that is, in that meeting, when you said X, it made me feel like this, right? It's just a statement of fact with clarity. And it's not attacking the soul. It's not saying you pissed everybody off with a subjective statement that has no real meaning. So it's the ability to not attack the soul, but be very, very specific about, when you did this is how it made somebody feel. I just wanted you to be aware of that. And straight away, we're a caring human race. We're going to, I don't want you, mate. I don't want you to feel that way. So then they take ownership of it. But where people get it wrong is they say, oh, you made me feel shit in that meeting. And you go, really? And it's just too generic, as you said in your triangle. So you don't get any real impact until you are very, very specific with factual examples that people can actually understand and respond to.
Yeah, definitely.
When you think about your career and your journey, can you think of an example where you might have reacted or acted in a way that went against the tide or did the opposite in whatever subject you was doing, or whatever whether it be coaching or in Cisco or whatever, where you did something that surprised people but had an incredible outcome?
Yeah, actually, I thought about this a couple of times. In the context of my book, actually, right, Making Time for Strategy, I mentioned it, and the reason was because I realized that I was one reason for my kind of career success was doing the opposite in terms of investing in future success, where most people were focused on the operational success. Right. So I'll give you two examples come to mind, actually. One was in my early days as an analyst in this consulting business. Everybody else was like, success is client, build hours and this kind of thing, right? Doing your projects. Now, at the time I was analyst, it was Excel models, it was business plans, it was a lot of this kind of analytics at the very start. And I realized after a while that everything was very customized, bespoke to every client. But I thought, there's always some common factors. Why are we building it from scratch each time? So I decided to do the opposite. And from everybody else who was just working on all these client projects, and I invested my own time, some time at work, to build templates and macros and figure this stuff out so that I could have like a flexible way to build my own models from a starting base. And everybody else was like, Richard, why are you messing around with this? Like, you're falling behind on your objectives, blah, blah, blah. And fine. But then 2 weeks later, suddenly I was able to produce the most beautiful looking, error-free kind of financial analyses in the business. And what was taking my colleagues a week to do, I could do in a morning, because I built the infrastructure and it was now well built. And so I could customize it and create charts and scenarios and you name it from that. And so that actually allowed me then on projects where I was involved, more time doing that and more time interpreting the numbers, creating the results, working with the client, the stuff that actually takes you to the next level, accelerates your consulting career. Probably why I became, say, the youngest ever partner. And then at Cisco, similarly, after the first kind of engagement we'd done with the client, I remember I went locked myself in my home office and beavered away for probably a day and a half on really extracting the key learnings from that quite a groundbreaking engagement in a kind of a anonymized way that we could share with other clients in the same sector that would be relevant for them. And nobody had asked me to do this. But I thought, yeah, it'd be really good to kind of get the learning out of this because it was a great project. But I remember at the end of day one thinking, what am I doing? And I'm like, no one's asked me for this. Yeah. I'm still relatively new in the company. And I'm just beavering away all day by myself on this half-finished presentation. Like, what am I doing? I was a bit down, because I'm quite an extrovert and I spent the whole time by myself. Anyway, I finished it off the next day. And then I sent it to my boss, who forwarded it to a couple of people, and it kind of went viral. These very senior people saying, "Oh, this is amazing work. We should, use this." And got presented. I was asked to present at international customer summits all around the world, and blah blah blah. All from this thing that nobody had asked me to do.
Yeah.
And so, actually, one of the things I say in my book is the most important project is the one that no one's asking you for. Yeah. That's where the strategic stuff lies. Yeah. Operations is what everyone is telling you to do and they're on your back to do. Yeah. And so I suppose that's kind of probably where I've always had a different perspective around, where should I focus? Yeah. And even the Eisenhower matrix. Yeah. I personally think that being in the urgent and important zone is a terrible place to be. That's firefighting. Yeah. When your house is on fire, that's disaster. Like, be the fire prevention officer, right? So even when there's urgent things to do, I try not to jump to them. I try to say, I'm going to do at least something today that's not urgent and yet is really, really important.
Your view of urgent and important might not be somebody else's view of urgent and important. So it is about, we're looking through our own eyes again, aren't we? So now I'm going to ask you a couple of questions just to wrap up. If there was only one example, only one thing you could say, what would you say you were most grateful for?
To be alive. What a privilege. I mean, we're not 6 feet under at this moment, right? We're living, right? We're actually here. That's the ultimate gratitude for me.
Great answer. Okay, second one. Knowing that we're, creating this knowledge and wisdom and insight and nuggets for all the various people that are listening to this podcast, if there was only one message, one statement, one message, what would be the one message you'd put out to the audience?
Yeah, I would say life is not a rehearsal. So playful out on the things that really matter.
Listen, Richard, it's been fantastic having a conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it. Loved the story, loved the background, loved the insights. And I hope sooner or later, either you'll visit Portugal or I'll pop over to France and we'll be able to have a beer. That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, brilliant. Great to meet you, Jeff. It's been a lot of fun on the conversation. I love your style and love what you're up to in the world.
A big thank you to Richard for spending time with me today and certainly brought a different dimension to the norm with that mixture of both business and personal impact. I absolutely loved his honesty and vulnerability when he was discussing his sister and how that incredible experience must have shaped his life and his mindset. An experience that most people would say, wow, that must have been tough. But then the energy he brought to the subject of leadership and helping CEOs really push the boundaries and travel outside of their comfort zone and reach for the moon. Well, more details on Richard, his website, his book, and his podcast are in the show notes, so please check them out. And there are loads more episodes for you to enjoy, so do listen back to some of my earlier conversations. There's some real gems in there. You can listen to all episodes for free. Just head to jeffdewing.co.uk and click on the podcast link. And of course, you can now also watch all of these episodes too in video format. You'll find the link to my YouTube channel in the show notes. A big thanks to Nicola and Gabriella at Cloud FM, to my PR team at Thinking Hat, and to my production team, Sam Walker and Michael Blades at What Goes On Media. Thanks for listening.